Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and today we're going to cover different wooden options when it comes to custom name badges specifically. Something that a lot of people don't seem to understand very well is that the material cost of doing a project is generally only a small proportion of the overall cost. Now, of course, my logo is an extreme example of what can be done for a corporate logo, and that's why I designed it in this way. These all have exactly the same logo. It's all the same design file. This one here is MDF, 1/8 inch. This one here is just regular plywood. This is roughly, let's say, 5 millimeters. So it's just a little bit thicker than this one here. And the final one here is solid oak. Now, all three name badges look exactly the same design-wise, but they produce a very different result. The first one we're going to laser cut is the MDF. Now, what you'll notice essentially is for all of these name badges, the process is exactly the same. It does the laser engraving and then it does the laser cutting. The reason why we do the engraving first and then the cutting is because we don't want the badge or whatever we're cutting with the laser specifically to move during production. The longer something stays as part of a larger unit, the less likely it is to move. While if we cut each little badge to begin with and then did the laser engraving, it might shift a little bit, because we do have air compressors shooting air down. We also have just the power of the laser and the vacuum system sucking stuff and moving stuff around. So for the MDF that you see here, compared to all the other ones, it is the most consistent. And the reason for that is because it's a man-made material. It's basically sawdust with a lot of heat and compression that produces a very substantial piece of wood, and it's a very, very consistent wood. So if you want name badges, let's say you want 500 done, and you want them to be almost all identical, nothing like wood grain and that kind of stuff, MDF is a great choice. Now let's do the next one using just regular old plywood. is sort of like an in-between. It's a somewhat consistent material because of how it's produced, but it has still a little bit of wood grain veneer on the top surface, which is what you see here. But unlike the live edge or just real solid wood that has the grain following all the way through one side to the next. Now, one of the challenges with plywood is that sometimes the veneer is not very thick, sometimes there's empty pockets. We do technically have that with real wood as well. The difference is that if there's pockets and glues and that kind of stuff that show up with the plywood, there's no grain to follow through to sort of hide it. It just pops out like a sore thumb. Now, the nice thing about plywood is that it's really cheap. To give you an idea, a 4x8 sheet of MDF is roughly $10. A 4x8 sheet of plywood, depending on the grade, can be between I'd say maybe $20 to $100. Again, it depends on the grade and what we're doing with it. Now you might be wondering how much is, let's say, oak. You can't buy a 4x8 sheet of oak. You can only buy planks of it. We have a whole inventory system with live edge from sycamore to basswood to every kind of wood you could think of. And oak actually has to be resawed. So unlike these two here, which I could buy in sheets, roughly $10, roughly $20 to $100, this one here, it needs a lot of manufacturing to get to roughly 1/8. The most efficient way of doing that is actually running it through the planer, clean up the top and the bottom surface, and then resawing it through the bandsaw. So obviously this one here will cost a little bit more than the plywood, and the plywood costs a little bit more than the MDF. But it's not like 10 times more expensive, especially when it comes to volume. We recently did a job where we did, 300 or so name badges. And the customer had a choice between roughly oak and plywood and this, because we didn't know what their budget was and they weren't sure. They had to approach a board and so forth. The price difference between roughly this and this, so the real wood to the MDF, is roughly about double to double and a half depending on the species. In this case it was oak, so it's roughly 2.5 price wise. But if you notice that the engraving is very different and it has a wood grain. Now this one here you could soak in water. This one here, if you soak it in water, it's completely finished. So it's not a direct comparison. They do have a lot of engraving time. For the customer, the engraving was very minimal, so the material cost had a larger effect on the overall cost of the job. If I was doing a name badge like this here, there wouldn't be much of a price difference because there's so much engraving happening. So as you saw, the laser, when it was producing the 3 name badges, didn't really matter. The material of the process was the same. The timing to cut them out is roughly the same as well. So the material does have a factor, but we recently did a large job doing a lot of custom wooden name badges. And the quote that we gave between MDF, oak, and of course we threw in plywood, which would be like a middle price. There wasn't that much of a difference between them. Of course, the oak is a lot more work because we have to resaw it and we have to do a lot of extra work that we don't necessarily have to do with the sheets of plywood or the sheets of MDF. So if you're looking for custom name badges, any font, any design, any size, any shape, contact us at CNCKing.com and I'll make it for you.